So my name is Corey, and I've been working with ScopeStack for the last year, working with John. And as promised, what we're going to do today is walk through a live scope teardown. So we're going to have a real statement of work in front of us. And our hope is that that gives you, a good piece of frame of reference to say, what are other people doing in their scoping? What are people doing wrong? How do we fix what we're doing wrong? Because there's not always a really obvious playbook and precise way to know how to do this. But one thing that we acknowledge is that also your customers that you have, they don't have a playbook in front of them either. And so what we want to equip you to do is just be really great at presenting scopes to those people that are professional, that are composed the right way and know how to fix some of the errors that people traditionally run into. So the main thing I'm here to do now is introduce John. Y'all saw his face on our ScopeStack materials. And so you have a lot to live up to, John. But the main thing you need to know is that John has been on really every side of this industry when it comes to IT services scoping, and is an expert who's seen a lot of scopes. And so, John, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so thanks for the intro, Corey. I'm surprised people still came even with my picture and the invite. So that's always encouraging. So I'm one of the founders over here at ScopeStack. So we've been doing this for about 8 years or so. And then prior to that, as Corey mentioned, I managed a team of solution architects. I was a solution architect for both large and small IT services companies. And so, to Corey's point, I've been involved in writing a lot of scopes, reviewing a lot of scopes, and now in the past 8 years or so, getting the opportunity to see just a wide variety of what statements of work are looking like from our prospects and customers. And quite often getting engaged around when we're onboarding new customers. Okay, hey, this is our current statement of work. We are open to your guidance, ScopeStack, around the best way to do this. And so that's what we'll show you at the end is actually, we'll tear one down, also point out some positive things of a statement of work. But then at the end of the day, we'll have a statement of work template that we'll send back to everyone that registered for the webinar, just as an example. And again, we'll mention this later, but we'd love to have a follow-up conversation. If you want us to look at your statement of work, have additional conversation there. So that's my background, and I'm excited to get into this stuff, Corey.
That sounds good. So I'm here to just kind of help MC today. John's the pro, and we're here in Greenville, South Carolina. So wherever you are, if you're in a different time zone, thank you for maybe joining us on your lunch break. We want to make this worth your while and really dive into it. And so, John, you said statement of work. We talk about scope of work. Maybe that's a good place to start as we get that loaded up. What's the difference? What do we need to know?
Yeah. So at a high level, right, and we'll talk about this even on the very first thing. So this says scope of work. So statement of work is the complete document. The scope is actually a portion within that document, which are the actual details of what you're going to do. So we oftentimes hear about those things being used interchangeably. It's just helpful to understand that the statement of work is the contractual document, the whole thing. So what we're looking at here is actually a statement of work. The scope of work is actually a portion of that document.
And this is a real scope we're looking at, right? Obviously, names changed, but this is a partner has allowed us to share this, and that gives us a way to walk people through how it's actually being done. We want to make sure that people know, like, we're looking at a real thing here.
Yeah, this was a new customer that we were starting to onboard. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it was hey, this is our current statement of work. Do you have any suggestions on what the new one should look like? Right. And so we'll kind of show you before and after. But this is a real live, anonymized statement of work for sure.
So for everyone watching, first of all, if you have questions as we go along, feel free to throw questions in the chat, and we're going to try and get to some of those at the end of the webinar. As we go through this, kind of what I'd like to do is just focus on 5 or 6 key things that this scope has as maybe, whether it's a problem or it's something that needs attention, that are probably common problems that a lot of service teams run into in pre-sales. And so, first of all, I'm a marketer, and I'm first and foremost a copywriter. So one thing that I share with maybe some of the pre-sales people in this room is writing documents. That document has an audience. And so as we think about the audience that is going to look at this scope of work, what are things that we need to have in mind for it to be fitting for them?
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And so, one thing, I think it's a great point, right? So as engineers, right? So if I'm writing this statement of work, I need to understand who my audience is. So it could actually be a number of different kind of personas or people. One, it's going to be someone that has the money, right? So potentially an executive, a leader within a business, and they don't really care about all the technical details potentially, right? They want to understand what are the kind of more business outcome type components and what is the price and how long is it going to take, sort of thing. And then an engineer is typically going to be looking at, right, is the technical accuracy there? Do they mention all the locations that we talked about? Do they mention actual very specific, components of the solution that we're going to address? So like that's what they're looking at. So again, you kind of have to keep in mind, right, who your audience is. So I think that's a great point, Corey.
So when we talk about like where to get technical and where to stay general, or maybe make it more about business outcomes, can you help us understand where that needs to happen first?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just hit this first part of this document because the next part is some of that. So first off, statement of work, not a scope of work, right? So that's one piece that is incorrect in this sense. Also, fixed price, the customer may or may not understand what that means. You understand what that means, right? But this is a fixed price bid, which means it's going to be a singular price. It's not going to be time and materials, billed at hourly rates or things like that. Also, just at like a first glance on this page, there's just a lot going on, I'd say. So, I'm going to get this and it's all this reference numbers, version numbers, all sorts of email addresses. I think in your very first glance at this document from a customer's perspective, again, we got to remind ourselves, like if we're a customer looking at this for the first time, what are we seeing? And that's where it's helpful for someone like a ScopeStack, right, to have that perspective, because if I'm using this statement of work every single day, I just get caught in that motion and I see it and I see it. Mm-hmm. That's why Corey's helpful for me, because I'm doing a bunch of stuff and I'm like, hey, Corey, what's wrong about this, right? And he's like, well, you spelled 100 words wrong. But other than that, so it's always helpful to get that perspective and just get a fresh set of eyes on it. But at a glance here, right, date of when the document is helpful. Reference, this is going to be typically like a reference document number, potentially a version number. I'd say that's like also duplicate down here. And so that's one thing that we'll see across this document in general is like we have a lot of duplicate information. So my suggestion is always to deduplicate as much as possible. Typically your customer name is going to be in here and then like the name of the project, right? And then again, duplicate information. So I have customer here, their name here, other name here, right? Which I know like it's here, it's kind of just all over the place. And so I understand the intent of it, and I'll show you in our document kind of where we would put that data, but also our client's information. The scoping party's information, a lot of data goes in right here. So that's just at a first glance on this cover page, things that I would look at improving or potentially just removing and or relocating to a different part of the document.
Yeah, so just about keeping it the essential things present. We talk about burying the lead sometimes, right? Like Don't bury the lead. Give the person what they're here to see and make it evident. So you said there was something that you wanted to get to specifically to talk about, like how do we draw the distinction between things that are technical and things that are a little more business oriented.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'm just going to point out too, I'm not a fan of table of contents. It just makes it feel like a much more intense document. So I would actually end up deleting this whole thing. That's my opinion. And so I'm just going to skip past that, no table of contents, and move on. All right. So this is what we were talking about. In this particular document right there, again, going kind of back to like duplicate information, a lot of information. So this has just a point out the field. So an executive summary section, right? Like that's our top level header. We have an introduction, business requirements, services summary, and a success statement. Where you're going to put some of that more business outcome type language is really, it is an executive summary. So if I'm an executive and I'm looking at the statement of work from a project basis, what is this about? Why am I even engaging with a services provider to perform these services? Do I want to reduce travel by 25%? Do I want to increase revenue? Do I want to, like, what is the business level objective of this activity? Right. And I would suggest that almost every single services engagement needs to have some sort of outcome based goal in mind, because otherwise, what are we doing? Right.
So you
So I
want
would say,
those stated in the summary.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I think these two sections could actually be combined. Like the introduction is, you can see customer background, problem statement, business requirements. I think you can combine those all into like one outcome based piece. And yeah, it doesn't need to be, war and peace, but it needs to be, a paragraph, maybe max two paragraphs about what we're trying to do here from a business outcome. But yeah, stated right up front early
Okay.
on.
So let's talk about pricing because I think people have different opinions about where to place pricing. You see that
Yeah.
on all kinds of products on web pages. Here you've got it inside of a statement of work. And so where does pricing belong in a document in your professional opinion?
Yeah. So in my professional opinion, one, in this particular document, right, this pricing is too early on in the document, I would say. So I understand like the intent around this was probably to, again, in the first couple of pages, get the pricing out there so that an executive can look at it and make a yes or no decision. But at the same time, you haven't really told them a whole lot. I mean, there was a little bit of information up here around, at a high level, what we're going to be doing. But it's not really enough to then justify, what if this is $50,000, right? I would prefer to put this further on the document. That's actually what we see quite often is it's towards the end of the document prior to a signature page. And again, there are different ways you can present pricing as well, right? So we're typically seeing fixed fee, as I mentioned earlier, and then you have these kind of nuances within it: fixed fee, phase based, fixed fee, milestone, all kind of the same thing. Or is it time and materials where we're billing at hourly rates? So again, to answer your question specifically, Corey, like I think this section needs to be towards the end of the document. And again, if you can avoid making it complicated, right? Keep the pricing as simple as possible. That's going to be your best option, right? One thing I will mention, because we talk about this a lot, just on the pricing, not necessarily related to this document, but fixed fee, right? You as a service provider are going to take on that risk. Time and materials, the customer is going to take on that risk. So again, knowing your audience is extremely helpful, right? So they might have a budget and they might say, hey, fixed fee is good for us because we want you to take the risk. If it's a project or a service that you've done a lot of, you're willing to take that risk because you kind of know the ins and outs. That's, if you can align on that, that's a good agreement to align on. However, if there's a lot of nuance, if there are a lot of assumptions, unknowns, it's going to be better off for that service provider to scope this at a time and materials where they have some leeway to say, hey, if things start getting a little hairy, right, we're just going to charge at this hourly rate. And sometimes the client's fine with that, sometimes they're not. And you can combine those and all sorts of stuff. But, in particular, this document, right, there's the name of the project and there's going to be a price. What I do like about this is, it's talking about it is a fixed price. What's also important in here is that, it kind of, what does it include? I probably wouldn't put that, but even more importantly, like, is travel and expense included? Are any other elements included in that pricing? So being able to have language around that is super helpful. Yeah, and this one's basically saying like anything beyond this is gonna be charged at time and material. So it's a little bit confusing in that it's a fixed fee, but then we're gonna charge you time and materials rates if for something else. So, again, some clarity around this language is probably going to be helpful. And more than likely, this language is going to change based on the pricing you're presenting as well.
Yeah.
So, right.
So if I was bullet pointing the things we've covered so far, we've said, first of all, we want executive summaries that are clear about business outcomes.
Yep.
Secondly, we want pricing at the end of the document, not at the beginning. So
Right.
now as we get into the actual scope, I know there's some things that you really liked about how this is put together on the scoping side. So
Yeah.
can you talk to us about what you're seeing that works well?
Yeah, absolutely. And this piece kind of addresses it too. So to me, we're talking about project phases here, and we get down to the scope section. I'll show you it's actually broken down into phases, and it just, again, it's duplicate information. It's a little bit confusing. I think the intent here was to say, we're gonna invoice maybe. I don't know what this weight means. I'll just put it that way. So I would we ended up actually removing this section because of the scope section. Right. So what I actually do like about this, so this is actually, right, this is actually the scope portion now of this project. And I actually like this table as an example. Now, if you'll look back up here, the phases in this list don't really match with the phases in this list, right? So I would actually end up, and what we ended up doing here was this becomes your design phase, right? Because that aligns with what we're talking about in terms of billing, and all the items that were supposed to be within that design phase are kind of in this one particular task box. So again, you're trying to remove this like cognitive load that your end customer has when they're looking at this document. And if you can make it really simple, all the following engagements you have with them, they're going to understand, the flow, right? Here's the business outcome. This is the part I should tell my boss. This is the part that I need to vet, right? I'm going to go down and look at this list, and they're like, hey, here are the phases that we're going to go. They're going to bill me based on these phases. Like, it just all needs to work together as opposed to just having all these kind of like duplicate bits of information all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like how you mentioned future engagements.
Yeah.
Just like this concept of like every aspect of how your company does business with someone else, including your scoping. It presents yourself. It puts standards in front of people about how you want to operate, how you want to treat them, whether you want to make it easy for them. And yeah, I love how you're laying out, how that plays out in a good scope.
Yeah. And, another thing I like about this one is actually, so if we did follow this phase-based breakdown, I do like having the deliverables identified per phase. So that's helpful. I like the structure of a table even. I think that's cool, and helpful, not just cool. A couple other things on this table, like I do like the idea of where is this work going to be done? So if you can map that work effort to specific locations, and sometimes it's like in this case, right, we're going to do this in our office. So we're going to pre-stage all this work. We're going to do all that work. And then it's helpful for the customer to know, hey, we're going to come on site for this bit of work. And so that's where I'm going to need you to, let us in the doors and some of that stuff. The responsible piece, I prefer to have just a client responsibility section kind of all in one spot. So the client doesn't have to come and pick out which things they need to do and not do. We see a lot of like RACI charts, which can be used, but again, in my opinion, it's a little bit too complicated for just this initial engagement.
Yeah, keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Yeah, and again, I'll show you a kind of a ending version of this table that we agreed on. But overall, I mean, generally, like some decent stuff going on here. Just want to make sure that we're aligning. If we're doing like phase-based billing milestones, we want to make sure that we're actually calling those things out correctly, right? And there's that consistency piece.
So the scope is everything that's included. Let's talk about exclusions, because I think the hard thing maybe about exclusions is feeling like inclusions are finite. You're saying this is what we're going to do. Exclusions can feel like an infinite concept of like, well, we could say anything that we're not going to do. So how do we hone in on the things that matter? And so, John, what would you say is like, how important are exclusions, and then how do we get that part right?
Yeah, so I mean, exclusions or out of scope is probably as important as what is in scope. And so you can see this kind of buried down here. I would prefer to pull this up, but also like format it the same way. So if we're gonna have assumptions here, like I mentioned, or client responsibilities, have just all those like, are we gonna do bullets? Or are we gonna do tables? Let's decide on one of them, because otherwise this reads like something else. But back to out of scope, you can even do it on a per phase basis too. So just like we're defining deliverables per phase, we can also define out of scope per phase as well. But to go back down to it, right? Like the purpose of out of scope is to tell the client or to give some guardrails to this project, right? To your point, Corey, like in scope could be this kind of infinite thing unless you say something. And one line that you can put in your statement of work is if it's not implicitly stated as in scope, then it's out of scope, right? Like some sort of coverall. And
Hmm.
sometimes they won't like that, but again, it gives you a starting point. What it does too is it gives your engineer, so you're scoping this work, assume the client signs off on it, they're going to go start delivering this work. By having a very clear out of scope section, it gives your engineer who's there doing the work an opportunity to say, hey, like, say we're doing, a server upgrade or something like that. And like, we want you to upgrade our network to support this new server. Well, um, that could take a whole week beyond the
Hmm.
initial scope, right? And you need to give the engineer an opportunity to say, hey, this is actually called out specifically here that we're not going to do that. However, if you'd like to engage in that, let me get our account manager involved. We can get a change request going, right? Like it's not only to protect your clients, also protect you as a firm, and probably more so that than the client. But also from the client perspective, right? Like again, you gotta protect yourself from that standpoint.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You're trying not to make it an exhaustive legal document, but
Yeah,
it does resemble one in the sense of like you're trying to anticipate loopholes, that your client might want to exploit either knowingly or unknowingly, right?
yeah, and like that's when it's helpful to have some standard language, right? So we know if we're deploying this IBM storage component that we've done this before. A lot of our clients will come ask for whatever X, Y, and Z when we're doing this, and that's typically not part of our engagement. That's why it's helpful to have that standard language already kind of pre-thought out and predefined. So if you keep running into that same conversation with clients, you can put that in there. As you start scoping your next project, it's automatically pulled in, right, as part
Mm.
of the out of scope section. So that's when it's helpful to have that kind of stuff nailed down. And that's also why it's helpful as a post project review, talking to the engineer, right? Getting pre-sales, post-sales, the engineer doing the work in the same room and saying, hey, what worked, what didn't work, right? Well, that engineer that's doing the work could say, hey, they keep asking us to do network upgrades and we're doing storage. Well, let's make sure we have that identified in our standard language, going from there.
So let's talk about project timelines.
Oh, please, let's
This
do.
is this is the good part.
Yeah.
This is where
Yeah.
scoping, I mean, it can get really detailed. What should we be thinking as we compose this section of the statement of work?
Yeah. So pre-sales is typically the person or role scoping these projects. So it's not a delivery engineer, it's not a billable resource for the most time, or for the most part, right? So that pre-sales engineer is not a project manager. So I don't think that a pre-sales engineer should be committing to any sort of timelines other than we can start the project in the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks, right? Like don't commit to specific dates. Like I don't, we took this out pretty quickly because they remembered after, getting some perspective, and I challenged them on it that, are you ever able to adhere to this, or does this prolong your scoping process as well because you're trying to figure out and back into some timeline. Now, it's one thing to calculate a level of effort, like how many hours or how many days, weeks is this project going to take? Again, we're calculating that. It's a best effort calculation. I'm sure we have standards, calculators, all that stuff. However, that does not mean you need to set some sort of, in your statement of work, any sort of schedule or timeline, in my opinion, as a part of this process. That becomes an output, and it's the responsibility of that project manager kicking off that project that says, hey, we're starting on this date. We have a clear date because today is today, right? Our goal is to hit these things by these dates, and then they can start building out their project timeline. I don't think you need to waste your time doing this as part of a statement of work.
Do you feel like
Opinion.
clients would a client be concerned if it's not present in the document?
I don't think so. From all the statements of work that I've scoped in the past, the client wants to know, yeah, when can we start? But they don't need to know when this build's going to be complete, when this phase is going to be complete. I've never, I mean, maybe I one time have been asked that and we just said no, right? But I think very rarely are they looking for this level of data
Yeah, you're
in the initial statement of work.
trying to determine, how much do we need to be explicit about in this document, and what things do we not, because we're going to determine that later. And obviously,
Yeah.
at this point, you haven't closed the deal when you're forming this document to begin with.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like this is all, we've had client conversations. This is our first pass at, getting the services engagement. And like, again, I don't think you need to have this. All right. So take that out. I'm just going to hit this. I know I hit this earlier, but like agree on how you're going to list information, right? So like, are we going to do bullets? Are we going to do tables? Either one is cool. Just do one of them. Right. And I actually don't like this type and responsibility piece again right here. This is assumptions or client responsibilities is a section that we see a lot versus assumptions. So this sounds more like a customer responsibilities thing. Like they needed to do this stuff. That way you don't need to have this section, and like it's a statement of work and it's a IT services engagement. It's all technical for the most part.
Mm-hmm. So, as far as your agreement with this customer that you're presenting this to, when it comes to things like terms and conditions, I think the question there is about thoroughness. And again, like when you look in this specific document, what belongs and what doesn't. So, John, help us understand when in regards to T and Cs, when is it right to be thorough, and what risk could we create if we kind of take the wrong approach to depth with our terms and conditions?
Yep. So the most common thing that we see is standard terms and conditions. So you've worked with your attorney, you've identified terms and conditions that protect you as a services organization. That's awesome. You have them. They don't need to be in every single statement of work. So what you should be doing is signing a master services agreement with all of your clients, right? So that master services agreement is going to be essentially the negotiation around the terms of the services you're offering, how you work together, so on and so forth. Like that's a separate document that should be decided upon and agreed upon before the statement of work, or sometimes it's done in parallel if it's a new customer. What that means is, and you can kind of see they're trying to execute this here, is like this statement of work is governed by they call it master client agreement, but most often we're talking about a master services agreement. And so you'll reference that this statement of work is governed by those terms, and you'll reference like either a document name or the date it was signed, something like that. In which case, if you have that signed, you don't need to have all your standard T's and C's in the statement of work. Why that is helpful is most redlining is done around the legal language around, billing and invoicing and all that fun stuff. So if you can remove that, pre-agree upon all that, your statement of work, one, becomes shorter, but it becomes kind of pre-agreed upon, right? And then the technical accuracy is what you're focused on, not the legal terms and conditions. So that's what I would say is have a master services agreement, and then make sure that's in place before you scope a project, or again, in parallel. If you don't have one, then use your standard T's and C's. And that should be like there's a big or right here, right? That they're trying to do that with. And so prior to ScopeStack, they were using this document template, and it would be a requirement for whoever's scoping to say, oh, do they have a master services agreement? Then if so, take this out. Or if it's this kind, take it out. But with ScopeStack, it's literally like a click of a button to turn that stuff on and off.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, well, we definitely want to talk about that in just a minute. One thing I wanted to ask, as we dug into this document, um, we've talked a lot about the writing, what's written in here, what's included and what's not included, or what needs to go.
yeah,
What about visuals? When it comes to like
yeah,
just the way your document looks visually, any kind of graphic elements, what style of bullet points do we have? Like, how much
yeah,
does any of that kind of stuff
yeah,
matter?
yeah. So again, the idea, this is a contract, right, that we're trying to sign. This is not a proposal. So, if I go up here at the top, like a proposal is typically like a more sales oriented document where you're trying to, talk about the background of Acme Corp or
Hmm.
who's on the team, how long you've been in business, all your certifications. It's like it's a brag document,
It's
right?
a little more
Plus we have, hey,
showmanship.
some showmanship for sure. That's not the purpose of this document. This
Okay.
document is, you already know who we are. We've been having conversations with you. Let us tell you what we're going to do. So, right, there's really less showmanship in it. Now, the only thing I would say is pretty common is around like topology diagrams or elevation, like rack elevations, things like that. That might be a visual that you want to put in here to say, we're putting this server, in this rack and, in this U or whatever. So like
Hmm.
you could put some of that stuff, and typically our clients are putting that after they generate a document out of ScopeStack. So um, some of that stuff is fine, but in terms of like, here's all the magic of our services organization, not really required in a statement of work. I mean, you think about like a real estate contract or any other contract, like they don't have that stuff in there,
Yeah.
right? That's what this is, right? And sometimes I think those two things get blurred because it's a pre-sales activity, right? It's not quite a delivery document yet. Well, it's just not needed, is my opinion.
Well, and those things can probably come down to individual personalities a lot of times, right? Like there's going to
Yeah,
be people
yeah,
that feel like, no, I want to make this look much nicer than this, and people that maybe care less than they should. But
yeah,
ultimately, if I take everything you said so far, one thing I see is so much overlap with my like marketing ideologies about the customer. And if I could distill it to two things, let's say we want to make this as simple as possible, so you can digest it quickly and understand it, and we want it to be as clear as possible.
yeah,
And like everything that you've shown us really has been pretty governed by those concepts. Like make it simple as possible, make it as clear as possible for them, just so that they can comprehend very easily what you're putting in front of them and precisely, what is included, what's excluded, all
yeah.
that kind of stuff.
And that's what you're seeing here, right? So now this is kind of on the right hand side, a cleaned up version, if you will, of this statement of work, right? So you can see it's very much, we're going to put the client's name in here and the project name. This is a statement of work, and here's the date, right? That's literally all we have on the front. I mean, you could put like the sales exec, you could put maybe a few other things, but you're not going to have like a whole table full of data. That table of data is going to be on a second page, potentially slimmed down as much as possible. But again, I'm not against this information. However, it's helpful to have that not on the very front of the document.
Hmm.
Um, and then down to this, right? So again, I'm just trying to give you kind of a side by side comparison, right, of what we ended up doing. So executive summary is still a top level header, but now we have a solution summary. And then we combined, right, a couple of different sections. So you can see this is, again, 3 to 5 sentences, business language, right? What's the business problem, the outcome we're trying to achieve, maybe some time frame, why now? So again, it's for the executives, the CFO, the COO, who's going to look at this and they're going to scroll down to the bottom and look at the price, right? However, the solution summary, maybe the director of IT that you've been working with for the past couple of weeks to gather information like that. This is what they're going to be looking at, right? So know your audience, um, know know who you need to be focused on selling this to. So again, you'll notice we moved the pricing further down, removed project phases and milestones. So now we have a top level of like our scope of work. Again, I like the table. We just did a better job of condensing this into, phase-based alignment,
Hmm.
and actual services, and then condensing those deliverables into the actual phases that we're going to do the work. So we removed location in this case. Also, we removed the responsibility portion. So again, keep it simple. Um, Kept some of the project delivery. Some of that stuff was good. Just kind of, you don't need to tell the customer when their hours are. That just seems like they know. um, but what we did is we simplified. So we added assumptions, out of scope, kept it consistent with bullet points, and then also just some other kind of we trimmed this down. We removed the project timeline as well, and then we're getting straight into pricing, right? So I can't pass that. It was up here. Oh, it's at the beginning. That's right. So, right, top level on the pricing. So we can now see this again. This language is variable based on the pricing that we're choosing there. And then terms and conditions. So again, this would be kind of the same thing. It's be driven by, do we have an MSA or do we not, sort of thing. And again, this is I'll send this out to everyone that registered here on the call, just so you have an example of it. Would be, glad to talk through your statement of work as well. Now that we've
Awesome.
had the benefit of, seeing thousands of these, it's pretty easy to pick out and kind of make some suggestions for sure.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's like you don't know how to find somebody who knows that kind of stuff, and so
Yeah, like who wants to talk about this stuff, right? But we do. So we're those weird
absolutely.
people.
Yeah, if you've taken the time to join this call, like
You're our people.
you know that there's a need, there's a way to do this right. And sometimes we're just looking for it, and it's like people don't know where to find it. So hopefully, this has been a good starting point. So, one thing I want to invite us to do, if you have a question, that you want to throw in the chat, that we could tackle on stream right now, we'd be happy to do that. So, feel free to write anything in the chat if you got something. While we wait on any of those to come through, John, let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Everyone here probably has, their own scope on their own desktop or in some email thread somewhere that they wish that they could pick your brain about. So what are two things that you would say if you could just boil it down to the positives and say, do this on every scope? What would that be for you?
Yeah. So two things. One, I'd focus on the craft of writing that executive summary and that solution summary. So who's the audience and what kind of information, do we need to provide? Right. So if you could focus on this, and this could be really good. Like that's when we first started ScopeStack, we didn't actually build functionality in to automate this portion on purpose because we felt like, scoping is a craft to a certain extent, and this is one of the best places to kind of put your narrative and your spin on this entire project. You can automate, standardize the way you deliver the projects down below in the scope section, but this is the piece that shows the client that you heard them and like what they're trying to do, both from a business standpoint and a technical, and that will set you apart as a technical resource in general. If you can talk both business outcome and technical in one, that's huge. So that'd be one, if I can count that as one. And then the second one would be have your the core sections, right? So your scope, so like your kind of key scope language, out of scope, client responsibilities, and key assumptions. Those are the ones that like those kind of core components are pretty much key. And sometimes we'll see clients that have missed, right? Like client responsibilities, and they see our template and they're like, hey, that's, we didn't really think about that. So let's do that. Right. So I think those would be my two things for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So let's see, we got a couple of questions here. When removing the table of contents, is that a rule for all statements of work or just ones under a certain page count?
I maybe this is a personal opinion. I don't like them in general. One, so say you make some changes, like so I used to have a template where I worked, and they had a table of contents, and I would make changes, and sometimes it wouldn't change automatically, and so you have to like right click up there and update table of contents. I know that's petty, but at the same time, that's just one more thing that I have to remember to do. So I wouldn't say it's a hard and fast rule of thumb on size or anything like that. I just in general don't like them. There are so many different tools within Word now, like you can, click layout and see it all, or there are a couple different ways you can do it to like review it. That makes it just as easy without having a table of contents. It just adds one more page.
Yeah, digitally it's pretty easy to search language that you're looking for.
Yeah. So not too concerned.
So it becomes just kind of one more piece of clutter in the document because of that.
And again, one more thing I as an engineer have to like keep up to date after I make a change. Theoretically, it should be changing by itself, but it doesn't always do that.
Yep. So we've got a ScopeStack question specifically. My VAR uses ScopeStack, and I'm new to this VAR. I need to get good at ScopeStack. So do you have a training path for new users?
Yeah. So you can go out to our support. So support at scopestack.io. We actually have a couple of like videos out there on that. But as well, I'd be glad to meet and talk to anyone about that. So if there's anything I can do, just feel free to shoot me an email. Or we have integrated kind of chat support in the ScopeStack app itself. So reach out to that team, and they'll get you connected to myself, or they'll help you as well. So we're not off limits. Feel free to reach out, and we'd be glad to help.
A regional question: do you service Canada-based companies?
Yeah. So we have several clients that are Canadian-based. So we were, funny enough, this is a great part about software. Clients in the U.S., Canada, Europe, kind of a growing presence in Australia as well. So it's, really exciting. Really no limits, for sure.
They're looking for the email that we can connect with you. Could you throw that in the chat?
Yeah. Okay.
And so as we wrap up, we're not going to keep people longer than they need to stay. But I think we've kind of covered the essentials of what kind of things are we looking to fix on our standard statement of work. Let's close with this. Like, walk us through just a little bit of what ScopeStack really does to help this kind of process be simpler and more uniform for organizations.
Yeah, so the great part about ScopeStack and what we're trying to do with ScopeStack, or what we are doing, is combining, all the stuff we're doing in spreadsheets with the stuff that we're doing in terms of like creating a document, right? So the level of effort and the language, we combine that together in one platform. What that allows us to do is come in and take, a version of a document like this, put in some dynamic placeholders into it. So like we can go ahead and pre-agree on what we want this document to look like. So if I did it and Corey did it prior to ScopeStack, we would have had two different documents, right? Corey's more intentional, I'm not. So his would probably be more detailed, mine wouldn't be. And like,
mine would be too detailed. That would be what we would have to fix. So
we need like a happy medium, which is kind of the thing, right? Like the point of that is we want to provide one voice to our clients, not John's voice and Corey's voice. So the ScopeStack, we can pre-decide on what it looks like, right? And all this information can be dynamically filled in from ScopeStack. And that's either being filled in by like a CRM integration, or, other methods and how you get information into ScopeStack. But then what it can also do is start building out like, all this technical information based on what we build out in ScopeStack. So we're predefining the level of effort, we're calculating the level of effort in ScopeStack. I literally just click generate and it builds all this for me. Right? That at the end of the day, that's what we're doing, is combining that language and level of effort into one platform. So you don't have to have all these different places to collect all this stuff.
John, you've been an awesome resource, and
you too.
Thank you for on behalf of everybody here, because I know it's so helpful to have this kind of expertise in front of us. I hope this has been beneficial for everybody who's on the chat today, who's joined us for this webinar. Thank you for taking your time. We appreciate it. In your inbox is going to be a follow-up that's going to include the scope. Will it have both of those that we just looked at?
Yeah, I can send both. I was
Okay.
going to send just the good one, but I'll send both.
We'll get those visuals that you can see kind of those differences. And if there is any way that ScopeStack can help you, please feel free to follow up with us. Shoot us a response to that. We would love to help walk through anything that you need explanation about, maybe even on just your next scope. So if you have one, you're like, man, I wish we could have looked at ours today. You know, the last one we did in our company. Let's talk about that. We'd love to help you. And thank you so much for joining us. Y'all have a wonderful week.